My name is Alex Wheatle, author of 15 novels. I'm also the subject of one of Steve McQueen's Small Axe episodes, and I am a lecturer of creative writing at Manchester Metropolitan University. And I do some outreach work where I'm trying to build up reading clubs in schools with some of my colleagues at the university. And I'm here to answer questions about my life, my experiences, and what informs my books. Part of the outreach work we have done is to create a teaching resource. And I know a lot of you have created questions resulting from that teaching resource. I thought it would be a good idea to invite two of my colleagues, Chloe Buckley and Marie Molloy.
Thanks for that, Alex. Yeah, so I'm Chloe Germaine Buckley and I work at Manchester Metropolitan University as well. And I've been working with Alex on this youth book club, young adult book club, where we've been going to schools in Greater Manchester to do reading groups with young people, focusing on all sorts of issues from environmental crisis in young adult fiction to racism and other issues. So it's been great to work with Alex on that project and to work with loads of fantastic young people as well. So I'm here to put some of your questions to Alex that have come in from schools in the area and across the country. We've had quite a lot of questions for Alex on early life and how that's shaped his writing. And we've put together a fantastic resource for you that looks at some of these questions. There's films in which Alex talks about his early life. There's some information about the Small Axe series directed by Steve McQueen in which Alex was involved. And one of the episodes, in fact, covers his life and how that shaped his fiction. So please do take a look at that resource if you're interested in finding out more about Alex's early life. We've got some questions here about young adult fiction in particular, and that's what I'm interested in, and that's what me and Alex have been working on together. So I'd like to put some of these questions to Alex. And first of all, we've got a question that's come in from Levenshume Girls' School, and it's, why did you decide to write books specifically for young people?
Why did I decide to write books for young people? Well, I was a youth worker for many years, Chloe, working in South London, Streatham. And when I was interacting with young people, and sometimes they would share with me their life experiences or their problems or the issues that they had to tackle, that kind of informed me. I'm thinking, well, I've been writing about young adults, if you like, who were, say, older than 16, 20, in their 20s and so on. And I felt that young people who came up to me in the youth service, they deserve their own narratives to be put on a page. And so I decided from that point onwards that I'm going to give that priority.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it, to give voice to young people's experiences, and that's so often marginalised in our society, and particularly at the moment it's really tough to be a young person. And I know that young people have been enjoying reading your books through lockdown. One boy, Harry from Lost on High, is a fan of the Cronkite series in particular, and he's got a question here about what inspired that series and inspired you to invent this fictional place, Cronkite.
Well, I can tell, Harry, in a bit of a exclusive that Cronkite comes from, really inspired by two places where I've lived. One of them was Croydon, which is about 7-8 miles south of South London. And the other is Brixton, which is very close to the centre of London. And I looked at the problems that young people have in those two areas, and I decided that for my series, I wanted to create a fictional place where I could explore and where I could have diverse characters and where I could basically have an open kind of canvas, if you like, for me to create my characters, my storylines, my narratives, and so on. So that was the first thing that came into my mind, that I wanted to play around with a fictional space rather than be locked down to a real place. And so that was my first thing.
Yeah, and so Littlebit's obviously a really important character, isn't he, in the Cronkite Night series?
Yes, Little Bit is my first character for the Cronkite series. And really, I base it a little bit on myself because I remember when I was 13, 14, and when I felt that peer pressure to have the right trainers, the right haircut. When I was 13, 14, I started to like girls and wanted to ask them out. But there's that kind of awkwardness that comes along with that age. And so I really wanted to put the spotlight on that because sometimes as adults, we forget how awkward those moments are. And so obviously there's other pressures like gang violence and so forth, because again, these stories are not so widely out there. And so that is what my template was to create the Cronkite series. And I gave him friends that all had different backgrounds and so forth and different problems and issues. And so really Cronkite came from that, just my observations of what the kids were like with the in the youth club. And also going back to when I was a kid and the problems that I saw, not just for myself, but for my friends around me who lived in Brixton and lived in Croydon.
Yeah. And I think that kind of answers Harry's second question, which was, is there anyone in particular that inspired the characters in Cronkite Nights?
Oh, yes, there are certain characters in my Cronkite series that are real people. Sometimes, for example, a character could be made up of two, three people who I used to know. And so that is where my writing stems from. It's always usually people who I have known, people who I've have a shared experience with. And I called it social realism, Chloe. And so that's always informed me, even way back to when I was writing poetry as a teenager.
So we've got some other questions here. I think these have come from Levenshulme Girls' School. And one of them is, who was the author that inspired you to write?
I guess it was reading C.L.R. James, a great Trinidadian writer who wrote The Black Jacobins. When I read that book, and that book features on the slave revolt in Haiti in 1791. It was the first time that I was learning about my own history, my own Caribbean African history. So that was a very important moment for me. And it kind of allowed me to even think about maybe then I could write my own narrative or the narratives of the past of my people. And so that gave me great inspiration to think to myself that my story, my mother's story, my great grandparents' story is all very important and are valued. And so that really gave me an impetus to think about that every narrative is important.
So you're talking there, I guess, about historical narratives, aren't you? And I know that our colleague Marie wants to talk a little bit more about your historical fiction later on. But I think one of the things that the kids have been interested in most is what's inspired you in fiction. So have you gone, this again is from Levenshulme Girls' School, and they want to know who, in your opinion, is the most inspirational fictional character? That's a tough one, isn't it?
It is. Wow. Because sometimes I can get inspiration from a negative character in fiction. And so to pick one out is extremely difficult. But I guess I'm going to go back to my childhood, if I may. And this is before I came across C.L.R. James, when I was just reading for pleasure when I was a 7-year-old, 8-year-old kid. And that was Huckleberry Finn. And I cite him out because it was just the freedom he had to live the life he wanted to live, you know, where he didn't have to conform to any rules or regulation. And that greatly appealed to me when, you know, I was living in a children's home, being restrained and being confined at certain times in my young life. And so that was really an inspiration to me, reading Huckleberry Finn and just imagining him just rafting down the Mississippi River with all that freedom around him. For me, that was a dream for me, you know, so that was my first inspiration.
Oh, that's a fantastic example. We've got a lovely question here from Our Ladies High School, which is a school in Manchester that's been involved in our book club actually, so it's really nice to hear from them again. And their question is another tough one. What do you think about young people today?
In my day, you could get bullied at school, yes, from say 9 o'clock to 3:30. But now, because of all this social media, sometimes there's no escape from that bullying, and that what really concerns me. And when I hear statistics about young people, they're affected because of their mental health, and this is rising as we speak, almost every year, every month. That is really concerning for me because obviously I raised children myself. I know the difficulties they had with, trying to adjust to this modern way of living where, you're only a glance at your phone away from perhaps a potential bullying kind of scenario. So that really concerns me. I just think that sometimes they're disregarded by the government because obviously they cannot vote. And so sometimes their needs get neglected. And that really angers me at times, because all of us, we were teenagers once. And, those lives are important. And sometimes they're not taken seriously, or their points of view are taken seriously. And I think it's time that, those who tell us what is good for us start paying attention to their needs. And, youth clubs, for example, so many have closed over the last 10, 15 years. It's ridiculous. So many libraries have closed where I know young people that I know, libraries can be the only space where they can go for a bit of peace and quiet, where they can do their homework and stuff. So again, their needs are being affected and not attended to. So it's tough being a young person today, I think, in many ways tougher than it was when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you talk about kind of mental health crisis and how that's affecting young people in particular. Is that a topic you've addressed in your fiction for young people, or is it a topic you think you might address in the future?
Mental health issues is definitely a topic I want to address in the future. I feel that I have to know a bit more about it, Chloe, so I could at least approach it with an informed view, if you like. I feel at the moment I really need to do that research and, raise my level of understanding, because there are so many issues now with gender equality and so forth that I really need to educate myself. So once I do that work, then yes, I'll be very happy to try and approach a piece of work that tackles that.
Thanks for that. I mean, I think in many ways you are tackling some of those issues, particularly in the Cronkite series, aren't you? You're tackling the effects of peer pressure, the effects of isolation, marginalisation, bullying, the things that you've talked about today. It doesn't have to be explicitly about mental health to be addressing those problems that young people have. But yeah, you raise a really important point there, which is one of the jobs of a writer is to really do research and to make sure you kind of covering stuff in your books in a really representative and rigorous way. So let's just do one last question, perhaps from our pupils that have sent questions in about your writing for young people. So I think one question I've really like, and it's come again from Leven's Hume Girls, and it's a nice one to finish off on for this section, and it's, what have you learned through writing your books?
What I've learned, I guess, empathy is a big theme for me. Just thinking about young people's needs and just building empathy for their lives that they live and the pressures they have to live with. I mean, I've been so impressed by many young people I've come across. Like, for instance, for a couple of years, I was working with the young carer department in my youth service, and to see the struggles that they have to contend with. Like, sometimes they have to go to school. When they return, they have to maybe deal with a parent who may be disabled, and they need to cook, they need to clean the house, they need to wash mum or gran or whoever it may be, and then they have to get up in the morning and go to school again, try to do that. Kids have to contend with so much, and that really impresses me. The fortitude of our young people, and sometimes they do not get the help they deserve from the authorities and government around them. And so this is why I try to advocate for young people whenever I can. And, I try to build an empathy for whatever they have to go through. And sometimes as adults, we can dismiss a young person, the way they behave or whatever, without trying to see the context to that behavior or why they're behaving in a certain way. Because I remember myself when I was a teenager, where I didn't know how to express what I was feeling inside my head. And, I didn't know that I could speak to a counselor. I didn't know that I could maybe speak to a teacher. So basically, my trauma came out in other ways. Perhaps violent ways or argumentative ways or mistrusting ways. I didn't know how to handle those demons inside of me. And so when I observed that amongst our young, like when I might go to a young offenders institution or a prison or whatever, I can build an empathy with somebody who tells me of a similar problems to what I had to go up with. And so I think all of us need to be aware of that.
It's a really nice way to put it, Alex. And I think as a researcher in youth literature, somebody who writes about children's books, often we say books for young people teach young people empathy. But what you're saying here is really the reverse, that perhaps books about young people and for young people will teach us empathy for them. That actually reading young adult fiction is something that is as a vehicle for other people to understand what's going on in their lives and empathize. And that's a really nice way of thinking about it. Yeah.
It's great to be able to speak to you, Alex. I know we've worked before with you with the Pan-African Congress back in October 2020, and you were on a panel with some other speakers thinking about the connections between Manchester and thinking about the connections between the Pan-African Congress that happened here in Manchester in 75 years ago. And I'm really interested to know, what do you think about the message of the Pan-African Congress in terms of today and the message it sends out to young people and how relevant it is?
I think it's very essential, especially in the times of Black Lives Matter, that students, pupils around the UK and beyond get to learn about the Pan-African Congress, or what happened 75 years ago, and the subsequent meetings that they had, where they tried to unite basically people who live in every part of Africa and beyond, to reach the whole African diaspora. And sometimes that gets lost, of those people who tried to formulate some kind of unity, if you like. And I feel that's been lost as well over the years. I mean, I remember in Brixton in the late 70s, early 80s, we had many organizations where they invited writers and thinkers to come together. They would hold Black book exhibitions and talks and meetings and seminars. And, in recent years, that hasn't really occurred. So hopefully, the Pan-African Congress, we need a reminder of all the great work those people did. And I think that now, especially with Black Lives Matter, that we should start thinking about those lines of trying to reach out to younger people in the African diaspora, say, look, this is what's been prepared for us, and what have we done with it? Can we make use of it? Can we utilize it in any way to inform the decisions now for young people, so they can get to know about the movements and so forth that have occurred over the last decades? I think that's very important for our young people to know that.
I totally agree. It's an inspirational message for young people as well, isn't it? And I often, when I was thinking about the Pan-African Congress and also thinking about your writing as well and the connections between the two, your own writing is inspirational to young people. Informed by your own life experiences, particularly growing up and what it was like in Brixton in the early 80s. And it made me think as a historian about what was it like to be living in Brixton at that time? What was the social, the political and the racial climate for you as a young man, sort of in 1980, 1981?
The political came later, after the uprising, if you like. I mean, when I emerged from prison, it was only then that I was, if you like, surrounded by thinkers and debaters and people trying to figure out what our lived experience was and how we should respond to that lived experience. It was only then that I discovered that there were newspapers being printed. It's only then that I started to listen to people like Darcus Howe, who was an activist at the time. It was only then that I learned about Olive Morris, who was active in the early 1970s. And so that political awakening only happened after what happened in April 1981, when there were street riots that lasted for 3-4 days, which I was a part of. Yes. Me as a young person, I just reacted to the police oppression at that time, but I didn't really understand the political oppression of young black people like myself, who were second generation. My parents were from the Caribbean, and they settled here in the 1950s, early 1960s. And so I didn't realize there was so much baggage to unravel, so much racism that we had to contend with, not just the overt racism of being called the N-word in the street, but the casual racism in the workplace and so on. And it's come to light even today with the likes of Prince Harry's wife, Meghan Markle. She cited racism in regarding to her young child. And so these little microaggressions that I had to face when I was a young person, going into the job market or going about my daily business, going into shops, that it wears you down. It really wears you down. So we need to make people aware that this kind of behavior does offend us. It does wear us down, and we should not have to deal with that on a daily basis, 24/7. So it's very important that people do look back and see what we can learn from the past. I mean, 1981 was very, very tough. And even before that, I mean, when people ask me, Alex, how did the riots happen? Then I take them back all the way to the 1950s, 1960s. It was building from then. What might happen, what might occur when you oppress a people for so long. Eventually, they're going to rise up and they're going to be very angry and very vocal. So we need to remember those lessons. And so all of this informed me that our histories, our pain, our narrative is very important. And if we're not going to write it, who will? Who's going to recognize it? Who's going to acknowledge those histories and those narratives and those shared experiences that I first got to hear when I arrived in Brixton as a 15-year-old way back in 1978, 79.
I couldn't agree with you more. It makes me think of what you said about, if we don't know our past, how can we know our future? And, I guess that really bridges the connection between your own kind of experience growing up and also what informs your writing and maybe the topics that you choose to write about. Thinking particularly about your books as well, I've just recently finished reading one of your books that was close to my heart, reading Cane Warriors. I particularly teach slavery and issues of race in America, and often, we think about race can often be something that we talk about America with not enough focus on Britain. You look at both. You look at issues to do with race both in Britain and in Jamaica, which is so important. And when I read your book, Cane Warriors, I was blown away. I've been thinking about it ever since I've finished reading it. I thought it was so powerful, the way that you focus on a real story, a real event, and make it so you bring it to life so well. And there were points in reading your book that it brought me to tears, and it must have been incredibly difficult at times to write. I'd be really interested to know what inspired you to write that book, particularly thinking about that particular topic and thinking about Jamaica, and how important do you think it is to tell that story?
Well, Marie, it's always that narrative it's always been in the back of my mind since reading The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James, way back when I was an 18-year-old serving time in prison. It's always filled my head, especially as I was listening to a lot of reggae music at that time. And Bob Marley had an album called Talking Blues. And I think he had tracks that reference people like Paul Bogle and Sam Sharp and Marcus Garvey. And so their narratives were in my head for a very long time. Since, I listened to artists like Bob Marley, Burning Spear. I mean, when people talk about my development as a writer, there's no way I could leave out the reggae music or the literature of reggae music that really informed me about my Jamaican history, about my African history. And so that was always in a corner of my mind, even when I started my writing career, trying to express how I felt, what it was like for me growing up in the social care system, living in Brixton in the late 70s, early 80s. But that part of the Caribbean history that was lodged in my head from reading C.L.R. James, that was always there. And so it was a trip, actually, to my mother. And she lives in Washington, D.C. at present. And when I'm spending time with my mother, I'm a storyteller, so I'm always really eager to listen to her stories growing up as a young girl in Jamaica. And she grew up in the parish of St. Mary, which is very close to the North Coast. In fact, very close to where Noah Coward had his Firefly estate. And once I did further research, I discovered that it was adjacent to the Noah Coward Firefly estate where Taki led his revolt, where they captured English garrison and stole all the ammunition and so forth, the guns. And when I asked my mother about this, she mentioned the fact that when she was a young girl, the elders of the family would sometimes mention Taki's name, who was this great legendary leader. And she didn't know too much about it. So I Googled Taki's name and I researched it and I thought, oh my God, hasn't there ever been a narrative written about this man or what occurred in 1760 in Jamaica? And from my understanding, not really. And so I decided it was this perfect fodder for me. It really was perfect. I felt that I was writing about my ancestors. And just like you wept while reading it, I wept while writing it because it was a learning experience for me. It really was, as I was going along, doing my research, especially when I discovered that even young people who were deemed as rebels in that time, they were hoisted up in cages and basically left to starve to death. That actually happened. And so there has to be some kind of historical reckoning, I feel. And I feel that me doing my bit, writing my histories, is such a powerful tool rather than just putting down a statue. Because as I went through education, I didn't need a statue to tell me what Henry VIII did or what deeds he got up to, or Queen Elizabeth I with her Armada, Walter Raleigh, and so forth. I don't need statues to tell me what those people did. And so I believe that me writing about Taki and his Cane warriors, that were lodged into the mind of a young person much more better than me just making a point by putting down some statue of some guy who made money out of sugar. So I believe if you can educate that much more, and we can try to lift these narratives into the curriculum, into the histories of universities and schools and so on, and so young people are aware of these histories, I think that serves trying to tackle racism that much better.
A question that from one of the schools has come up with from Our Lady's Roman Catholic High, Miss Grieve and Miss Bramley. They said, how difficult is it to come up with a title of a book? So thinking about Cane Warriors, was that an easy title to come up with, or did you grapple for some time trying to work out what that title might be?
It came to me, the title came to me almost overnight. It really did. I was just imagining this cane field, basically, and in Jamaica, because where my father lives, he lives about 20 miles west of Kingston, or he did live there. He passed away in 2011. But when I used to visit him, when I used to go to Jamaica, I used to take the long drive from Kingston Airport and drive along, and I would see the cane fields, and I would see where the great rum companies of Jamaica, they'd have their distilleries and so on, and they had these long cane fields stretching out into the distance. And so I always had cane as the first name of if you like, the title. And then Warriors, I just woke up one morning thinking about this story, and Warriors just pinged into my head, and so Cane Warriors. It was that simple. But some other titles I've had, Bricks and Rock, that took me 3 months to come up with that. I thought, what am I going to call this novel? What am I going to call it? So it took me forever. But Cane Warriors, almost like an overnight kind of thing. So I'm really pleased when I remember Paul McCartney, he talks about sometimes songs, he can access the brain and onto the page or onto the guitar or piano, and he can write a song in 20 minutes. And then he says other songs can take 3 months or a year. So it's a bit like that with book titles as well. Some take long, some can take a second. Some take, different times. It's just you never know where the zeitgeist might hit.
Yeah, is that the same in terms of writing and in terms of the research process and gathering the story, particularly when it's based on a real event like this one was? What are the challenges in terms of trying to kind of meld together the history with thinking about the story and the individuals? Is that very difficult? What are the main challenges you found when you were really telling the story from that point of view?
That's a very good question, because at first I did consider writing Taki's narrative. But from all the research I conducted, I couldn't quite confirm his background in Africa. We had different kind of narratives crashing against each other, and I could not rely on one single narrative. Some people say he was a prince. Some people have different ideas or different thoughts on where his roots lay. And so that's when I decided, let me just write this. The main protagonist is going to be a 14-year-old boy. And so that cut away a lot of the research for me, to be honest. I didn't have to dig somewhere in some musty old museum somewhere trying to uncover real facts. I had the skeleton of the story. I was very blessed with that. And for, a storyteller, I had the basic skeleton that I knew where this revolt occurred. I knew what year. I even knew what day. I knew that. I knew that the names of the plantations were Trinity and the Frontier and so forth. I knew that they marched to Fort Haldane, where they sacked it, killed everybody there. I knew they stole something like 40 plus guns. I knew they stole ammunition. So those were facts. I knew there was a last battle. I knew that Taki was captured. I knew that they chopped off his head and they displayed it on a pike in Spanish Town. Those are hard facts. And so I had a hard skeleton to work around with. And so I guess the fictional part comes with me just placing on the muscle, the tissue, and so on.
When I teach slavery with my students at MMU, and we talk about issues in North American slavery, it reminded me so much of your book. It reminded me so much of the themes that come in your book are so powerful. So I think using historical fiction as a way to actually base on a real event, but then to be able to breathe life into these characters and to really connect with the reader is such a powerful way of connecting people to history. So I thought it was absolutely amazing. Got a couple more questions connected not just to Cane Warriors, but thinking about your writing more generally from students. And one of the questions is, how did you get ideas of a theme for some of your books? And I guess we've answered one of them already. You've answered one particularly to do with Cane Warriors. What about maybe other books or other stories you've written, are they always themes that are connected to your life or to your ideas more broadly? What would you say?
It's a very good question, Marie. I think what really drives me when I look on all my books that I published, I think the one theme that probably connects them all is injustice.
Yeah.
Usually, my characters, even in the Cronkite series, there's an injustice there in terms of the families that I'm portraying. They seem to be, poverty-stricken, not done well, neglected, those kind of issues. And for me, that's what drives me, because I want to give a face to that injustice. I just don't want them to be a statistic. I want them to be a living, breathing kind of thing, where readers can connect with that, and maybe through that reading they could see the injustice. I want them to put down a book and say, why are people living that way? Why aren't they given opportunity? Why are they having to tackle such injustices and such issues? Whether it's a Cronkite estate or living in bricks or wherever it may be. And so I guess that's where I'm informed. That's what I want to try to make people understand. That, and so my writing is not just for the working classes. I'd really like members of the royal family, if possible, to appreciate and understand where my characters are coming from, to give them some kind of insight to whoever. For me, my books are free for anybody to explore and to learn and to try and understand how these people can operate, how they can survive, how they confront the issues that they have. And so I think that's the main thing. And I mean, that started with Bricks and Rock, where I have a character who's coming fresh from a children's home, just trying to fit in. For me, that's universal, because I could have the same narrative play out in Beijing, in Los Angeles, in Bolivia, wherever you might choose to point your finger on the map. These are universal struggles that young people and old people have, in working class communities. So I just want people to recognize those struggles and see them for what they are. And maybe at the end of reading any of my narratives, think it should be better than this. It really should be better than this. And when you think about it, we're in 2021 and you look around the world, you see so much struggling, so much poverty and so on. That still affects me, that still drives me, that still makes me angry. And so as long as that continues, I will continue to write my narratives, populated by people who face a daily struggle.
Why is it that when it comes to history, we don't necessarily always hear about the stories that represent so many other people? What is it that means that some stories are included and remembered and others seem to not see the light of day? And how important is it for creative writers and writers generally to make sure that that's redressed?
Particularly when you're talking about colonial history, what happened in Asia, what happened in the Caribbean, what happened in Africa, for example, the Mau Mau resistance and so forth. Our school kids don't really get to explore those histories. And I think in the UK, there's a certain awkwardness. There's a certain feeling of these stories, these narratives make the establishment uncomfortable. But I think, just like they have done in Germany, that it should be embraced. I mean, I was really impressed when I went on tours of Germany, and they actually instruct every child to learn about the Holocaust. They actually visit the sites. They're very open about it. They know it was a great mistake. It's part of the history, but they don't deny that history, if you like. And I think in the UK, there's a kind of sense that they want to be in denial, as if it didn't quite happen, as if it didn't quite occur, but it did. It did. I mean, the other day they're talking about gifts given to Meghan Markle in terms of, I think it was some earrings gifted to her by a Saudi Arabian prince. But the newspapers might put that in bold headlines and so forth and try to make her and maybe others feel uncomfortable about that. But the conversation is never extended into what makes up the crown that the Queen puts on her head at the opening of Parliament, and where those gems and jewels came from, what countries they came from, and what peoples in those countries suffered for them to be able to take those gems and jewels and so forth to prop up, if you like, the monarchy in the UK. And so we really need to have this conversation about how much of other countries' wealth that the UK plundered. People are rightly proud of the UK stance in the Second World War, the First World War, and so forth. But they really need to understand that sometimes they have to consider the stain of the colonial system and what that meant for so many people around the world. I mean, I could talk about Amritsar, what happened there. I think it was the 100-year anniversary. Was it last year? I mean, for me, that wasn't really explored or marked in any kind of way by the establishment over here. I don't think there was any kind of regret. I think the Queen actually visited there sometime and she did pay her respects, but still, for me, there's no real acknowledgement. And the same goes with what happened in the Caribbean. There's no real acknowledgement. I mean, we can all enjoy. I remember that time when I think it was Prince Harry, before he was married to Meghan, that he went to Jamaica. And there was a nice photographs of him racing with Usain Bolt. That was all very nice and fun and so on. But what I'd really like to see happen and occur is for members of the royal family to actually honour those freedom fighters who actually perished in fighting against the UK and so forth. And yes, you can have your big statue of Nelson in Trafalgar Square. And, in no way do I want to tear that down, but also it should be mentioned that he actually served in Jamaica to uphold that system, that colonial system of repression. We need to acknowledge that as a country, I believe. And then when that happens, I'm sure that as far as a university and education is regarded, they'll finally look on narratives that appreciate and acknowledge our histories and our narratives and our stories and what hurts us. I call it our great pain. That needs to be acknowledged, and every year I see sometimes fathers of friends of mine who served in the Second World War, who were born in the Caribbean, and they march past the Queen, they take the salute and so on. And yes, they're honouring heroes, the establishment. Now it's time to honour our heroes, our freedom fighters who fought in the Caribbean, people like Taki, people like Sam Sharp, people like Paul Bogle. And I'm sure there's many others I could mention who fought for the Mau Mau, who perished in Amritsar, young women and children. That has to be acknowledged. That has to be, if the monarchy wants to be in any way relevant in the future, it was something they're going to have to tackle, because from the latest polls that I see, young people are really not supporting them. But if they really want to be inclusive, then it cannot just be us honouring them. They have to honour us as well. And so that is one of the great motivations why I'm writing books like Cane Warriors, why my next piece of work will be Commercial of the Caribbean. And there'll be more about that later, that will be published next year. So there's so many more stories to tell about our histories, our narratives, and so on.
Also, in terms of the work you've done in terms of small acts is incredibly important for changing that narrative as well. And I wanted to ask you about your involvement as a special consultant in terms of the writing room for the Small Acts series, and also the actual the episode that is on your life. And I wanted to ask you a bit about it as well, in terms of how that raises awareness for young people, and also in changing what people know about our past and starting to bring it to the fore.
Well, Small Acts, it's interesting because I was speaking to my children, and they watched and sat down with me to watch the first episode, The Mangrove 9. And they all turned to me and said, "Dad, I didn't know about this." Yeah. So that's why it's important. We need to educate our young, and our young need to educate their young of our experiences. Not just my generation, but my father's generation. So that's why it's so important. And it's not just about educating my children. It's about educating your children or anybody else's children. Yes. About what we experience. It's all part of the British narrative, as far as I'm concerned, because these events happen here in the UK. So that's why it's so important. And I first came on a series as a creative in the writer's room. And me, Steve McQueen, and the other creatives, we were discussing the themes that we want to see portrayed. We wanted to see what kind of real historic events should we include in a TV series. And so Mangrove, Steve had that idea already. That was always going to be the first episode. And Steve always wanted a party. But as we moved along, he came in one morning and he said to us, right, I really want a story that tells the narrative of a young black man who has struggled through institutions, maybe went to prison, and he wanted a narrative like that to just examine what that can be like. And one of my creative friends who was on the creative team, Alistair Siddons, he turned to me and he said, Alex, that is you. That is your story. Yeah. And Steve said, what's this? What's this? And so for the rest of the day, I related my story to all the creatives around me. And at the end of it, Steve got on the phone to the BBC and he said, right, I've got episode 5, Alex Wheatle's story. So, yeah, that's going to be episode 5. So that is how it came about. And when they started to film it, it was really overwhelming, Marie. It was almost like I had passed away and I was hovering over the film set and watching my life play out. It was really a weird kind of surreal experience. And I remember weeping, actually, when they actually filmed the scene of me in my hostel room, because they had recreated it so lovingly with the flyers and posters, the single bed propped up by paintings and so on, the record selection, the turntable. It just took me right back and I felt very emotional. But at the end of the day, I felt a great pride of looking where I came from. And again, this goes back to Simeon, my mentor in prison, almost telling me every day that my life mattered. My life was important. And so, yes, I did have to sometimes pinch myself as I went through this filming process and I visited the set and I met the actors. But yes, stories like that are invaluable, I think, to, so it can tell the viewers that you can have a life like that and still be successful. You can have a life like that and be a lecturer at a university. You can have a life like that and be a writer. I think that message is so powerful, especially as we know young people struggle from those kind of backgrounds today, even. I go to Lem Sisse. He has this Christmas dinner initiative, which is fantastic, where young people attend on Christmas Day and they feel that they need to go to a space where they can enjoy Christmas, where they got a caring kind of environment around them. And to go into a situation like that, a space like that, where, for the last 2 years, I've attended Hackney Christmas dinner. And to see those faces, and they have the same kind of issues that I had, sometimes a lack of self-esteem, sometimes thinking, I'm not going to achieve because of what occurred in their home lives when they were very young, the problems that sometimes can arise. To know that I can inspire young people like that, it just fills me with a lot of pride. It really does. And hopefully we will see more of that type of filmmaking. Like the recent film nominated for a BAFTA this yesterday, I think it was Rocks. Fantastic film, telling these narratives of these kids living and trying to deal with the forces put in front of them. I think it's about a young lady who her mum goes missing and she's trying to raise a young brother, and she's she's trying to exist and trying to confront all these issues that she has. So these kind of stories, they really excite me that now we're starting to see them. Now we're starting to recognize them. Now they're not just statistics, or dole scroungers or benefit, people living on benefits or whatever. We're really seeing the true lived experience now in books and on screen and in theatre. And so I'm really encouraged for the future.
No, I agree. I think hearing your personal story and other stories where people have triumphed over adversity and have thrived in their lives, and to tell young people those stories are incredibly important. We've got a couple of questions actually that we could relate to that from some students from Levenshulme. One student has said, what was the most critical moment regarding racism in your life?
What I deem was the most perhaps cruel act of racism that I suffered. And people might be surprised, but it wasn't a beating. It wasn't me being laced into a straitjacket or any kind of act of violence. Well, in a way, it was an act of violence. It was an act of vocal violence, if I may describe it as that way. When I was about 8, 9 years old, and I remember it to the day, it was a Sunday, and it was visiting day for relations of kids in care, where parents, brothers, uncles, whatever, can come and visit my peers. And I had no visit. I never had a visit from any family member. And after that day, when everybody went home, it was about 8 o'clock when I was getting ready for bed. And I asked the officer in charge of my house, I said, how comes no one ever comes to visit me? And she said to me that they came from the jungle, they brought me to the UK, left me here, and they've gone back to the jungle, and they have no idea how to contact them because they're in the jungle. I mean, that really affected me deeply. My low esteem, my whole sense of being. And so it took me many years for me to get over that. I mean, beatings and so on, you could survive that, but that mental torture, that took the longest for me to overcome. So that was probably,
It's incredibly difficult. Difficult. What a thing to have to go through, Alex.
Yeah, to say to a child, so
would you give any advice to the young people in terms of with the challenges they might face today and how maybe best to cope with feelings of anxiety and motivating yourself through that?
Well, Marie, I did, I think earlier I mentioned reading Huckleberry Finn. And I not only read Huckleberry Finn when I was very young, even before that, when I had a gift, Marie, and that gift was the ability to read. I can't remember who taught me to read, but I just picked it up very quickly when I was a young child, when I was 5, 6. And so at that age, I was reading comics. I was reading the Beano, Whizzer and Chips. And so that gave me relief, if you like. That gave me an escape into another world, the world of the comic, the world of the narrative. And so no matter what happened to me during the day, at least I can go back to my comics at night and escape into this world. So that was the first thing. The second thing was to find something, and I'd advise anybody to do this, to find something that you enjoy. That could, for me, later on it was writing, later on it was sport, later on it was dancing. And so just to find something that you enjoy doing. It could be something very simple. It could be playing a board game. It could be anything. Just try to find that activity, that something that makes you smile, makes you grin, makes you, makes your heart sing for a little while. I think that is key. And this is why, this lockdown has been so tough for young children, I think, because at least when they go to nursery school, wherever, they've got things to play with and things to enjoy and things to interact with and so forth. I think that's a crucial part of education. Even up to the age of when you're a late teenager, I still think that's a crucial part of education. Games time, play time, where you get to interact with others and learn boundaries and so on. And maybe sometimes learn to be competitive. But the crucial part of this, find something, whether you're 6, whether you're 16, whether you're 10, 12, try things. If you fail, that's okay. Try something else. But always try to find something that you enjoy doing, whether it's for 10 minutes, half an hour, whether it's going to a gallery and just looking at amazing paintings, whether it's going to an exhibition, whether it's going to a rugby game. Find something you enjoy, and that relieves stress.
I'm really grateful for answering the questions of the students from various schools, and for having the great opportunity to speak to you about Cane Warriors and your other books and your incredible Small Axe series. As I said, I'm sure others will feel the same if they've read your work. Reading Cane Warriors has had a huge impact on me. It just was the most incredible book. I read it with my own girls, and I really am so happy to see these more diverse stories actually being written, being read, having series like Small Axe on our television screens. That's the world I want to live in, a world that talks about everybody's lives, not just some people's lives.
Absolutely.
And that's what matters. So thank you so much, Alex.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate the time. And I could speak to you all day, but thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. May I welcome back my colleagues from Manchester Metropolitan University, Chloe and Marie.
Hi.
Hi.
We just wanted to come back in and also say thank you to the schools that sent in questions today. It's been brilliant to read through all those questions and to hear from you and to hear about how you've been enjoying Alex's books. So thanks.
Yeah, there were some fantastic questions and really made us think as well. So thank you so much for your input.
And I think what I'd like to do, if it's okay, Alex, we've got one last question to leave the audience with, and that is, what piece of advice would you tell your younger self?
Ooh, what would I tell my younger self? I would tell maybe an 11-year-old Alex to believe that things will get better, believe that there is love out there, and you will meet somebody, friends and whatever, who will love you for who you are. Don't be ashamed of your past. If there's anything that's preying on your mind, please take it to someone, an adult that you can trust, and believe in your abilities. You have fantastic ability. Believe in that and share it and express it. And you're just as lovable as any other 11-year-old out there. So believe in that. Believe in yourself, that you can be capable of love and can be receiving of love. Believe that.